And live with the Cold War. Excuse me. Um, Afternoon, everybody. It's about 2:30 on Saturday, February 1st. I don't know who's out there, if you can hear me, any of those things. If anybody can hear me, and it's just type something in chat really quickly, if you guys don't mind, just to be able to double check, be much appreciated. Big Sarge, there we go. Thank you. That's hello back to San Francisco. That's the lovely Bay Area. There we go. Shalom. There we go. That's uh oh, Sweden. There we go. We've got coast to coast now. So afternoon everybody, or good morning or good evening or wherever it is that you happen to be tuning in from. No real schedule set for this. This was just I'm home from the grocery store and home from Costco a little sooner than I thought I would be. So I figured I'd take a bit of time. Haven't done one of these in a few months, so I figured I'd jump in. Nice opportunity just to say hey to people, give an opportunity to people to say hey back, ask questions. Let's talk about the channel, talk about the Cold War, talk about history. Anything else? I mean, it's been a pretty slow couple of news weeks. So yeah, let's hope everybody is doing well. A very belated Happy New Year. This on February 1st. That's probably the outside limit. Unless of course you celebrate Lunar New Year, in which case, absolutely Happy New Year. Yeah, so I'm just going to take a quick spin. There's, a lot more comments already than I thought there would be. You guys seem keen. Let's see. New Zealand, like there we go. That's yeah, nice check-ins all over the place. So, um, going through Albania, nice little check-in, nice little global check-in going through there. That's Privyet Sista. There we go. That's Scotland. I'm hoping to be in Scotland later this year. We will see, but that is the plan. Um, that's yes, Trump's trade war doesn't raise prices on Cold War imports. 25% across the board. That's outstanding. Yeah. Let's see. First question. Here we go. We'll move right past Mr. Trump and jump right into the questions. I think this is. Does does that pin that on the? No, wait. What did I just do? There we go. From the UK, are we going to do a video about the Khmer Rouge? Yeah, absolutely. That's Cold War and Cambodia, or they go hand in hand when you start talking about things like ethnic cleansing and genocide, of which and you know Maoist, Marxist revolutions, et cetera, et cetera. And the Khmer Rouge is a really huge part of that, obviously, um, where you get, it's like I mean, not exactly stable, but a relatively secure government sitting in Phnom Penh that is then overthrown by a pretty much group that comes out of nowhere that really only comes to power because of the destabilizing effect of U.S. bombing in Cambodia, which is spillover from the war next door in Vietnam. So, I mean, it is a pretty important message, a pretty important topic, obviously. When we're talking about the Cold War in terms of talking about things like the Khmer Rouge and the genocide that happened there. Ties in well, obviously, it's with Kissinger, who's obviously another one of the super key and influential figures within the Cold War. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. That's a very firm yes as to when we get there. I mean, this is people ask me when we're going to do things, and I give an answer, and then we don't come anywhere near um, meeting whatever that is that I've not quite committed to, but sort of like at least tentatively promised. So please don't hold that against me. But yeah, that's let's see. Uh, why were the Soviets focused on being cheap when making a profit wasn't a concern? I mean, I'm kind of guessing, like, when you talk about being cheap, like that, you mean like low quality type goods, or it's that's I'm assuming that, as opposed to, like, like it's a lower quality, which I'm assuming is maybe what you mean by cheap, a lower quality, plentiful, cheap and cheerful, versus a possibly more expensive but far fewer of them, in a socialist system, like, that's designed around providing for the masses and providing something for everybody. Cheap and cheerful works much better, because it means that you can at least supply something to everybody as opposed to a few things to a few people at the top. Like, that's assuming that's the intent of the question. That's my stab at that answer. I'm not an economic historian. Obviously, like, it's like a lot of what we do does touch on economics and, like that type of thing. But in terms of, I think that hopefully gives sort of a ballpark answer to the question that you're asking. Um, okay, good. Somebody confirming that it's pinned, like, after I've gone ahead and gone through two of these, and so there we go. Um, that's yes, that's have we ever done Cold War videos related to Cold War era Canada? Nope. 6 years we've been on the air. Believe it or not, I am 6 years older than when we started this. I feel like it's been possibly longer. Um, but no, we've actually never really done any videos focused on Canada. That is probably a fail. I'm going to call it a failing. It's maybe a failing on my own part. It's just something that, I mean, Canadian history is. I don't think of it as being interesting. And there's going to be people that, rightly so, will jump in and yell at me. There's lots of really interesting things about Canadian history. Um, yeah, like, I'm not a Canadianist. I'm not. That's not really my area of focus, my area of specialty. There's a couple of videos that I've sort of had rattling around in my head. Like, I think we want to do the CF-105 Arrow, just because that's such a it's such a Canadian topic. How do you be Canadian and do a series on the Cold War without at least talking about the Arrow? I have a an opinion of, like, the Arrow program that isn't particularly popular amongst the masses, I would say, um, but yeah, I mean, we'll get to that. There's a couple of other, like, sort of Canada themed videos that I'd like to jump into at some point. Probably the Quebec nationalism, leading up to the FLQ crisis, through the 60s and sort of peaking in the 70s. That's actually I think outside of Canada, that's probably a relatively much less known series of events, but it certainly plays a huge role in terms of, like, the formation and the shape of what Canada looks like today in the present. So yeah, that's to answer your question, Lego Lord. No, we've never done anything on Canada up to now. We've done a couple little shout outs, but we've never actually done an episode. But we should definitely go about rectifying that. And as I said, I've got a couple of ideas, but just not sure what exactly that's going to look like. So that's um, where am I here? You guys are asking a pile of questions in here already. Give me a second here. That's um. Oh, here we go. So, elaborate on Armenia and Azerbaijan and the cultural heritage distraction. I mean, they, so much of this is there's power. It's power dynamics. I mean, I'm not hugely familiar with the ins and outs of the relationship between the long-standing relationship between Armenia and Azerbaijan and the conflict that exists there. Um, there are people that I work with and that, that we team up with, who are very much more, like, informed as to, like, the ins and outs of it. Um, and certainly they will be the ones to be able to that will develop those episodes and the scripts when we get to it. And we do plan on addressing those issues, whether it's the background in terms of Soviet Armenia and Soviet Azerbaijan, and certainly we've been doing more post Cold War stuff, trying to, like, do an episode that sort of links, like, what something that looked like in this during the Cold War period, and then see how that carries forward into the post Cold War. Just because it's, I mean, history is periodization in history, like, sort of what the dates and the labels that we put on things, they exist for a reason. It's for clarity, for distinction. But there's lots of wiggle room, and there's lots of things, and it's not like there's ever really a clean break from one to the other. How many of our episodes have started with, it's like we're starting in 1945, but the real origins of this start like before the Second World War. Like, it's, I think the farthest back we've gone at this point is somewhere like 900, like 8900, something like that. I can't remember exactly, but we've crossed that 1,000-year threshold in terms of how far back we've had to start a subject, and then move forward really quickly, obviously into relevant periods. But that the Nagorno-Karabakh issue is a really deep and really complex issue. There's I mean there's religiosity to it. There's politics. There's it's ultimately it's always about power, because any conflict is always about power. But we will address that. I'm just not exactly sure how and when that's going to be done. So that's a very long-winded answer, which I'm prone to do, to say that yeah, we'll get into it. I just don't know exactly how that's going to look. There's a lot of sensitivities, and both communities are very close to their own. Oftentimes, they're very close to their own viewpoints in terms of how they view things, which isn't uncommon. Um, as a sort of similar thread are recent videos looking at Georgia and the Soviet Union, and then the Georgian Civil War. If you go through the comments on those videos, there's a lot of very passionate Georgian nationalists that have told us just how wrong we are in terms of the information that we've presented. So, um, yeah. Um, Another question. Have we done a video on Poland and Solidarność during the Cold War? No, we haven't. We've not gotten to the 80s. I think the last time that we did anything with Poland was Poznan 56, I want to say. We will be coming back to Poland. Poland this is a really interesting sort of hotspot locale for a lot of like sort of low key subversion that happens, especially starting through the 70s, from what I'm aware of, and then building towards the Solidarność movement in through the 80s, ultimately resulting in leading to 89 and sort of the end of socialism and the People's Republic of Poland. That may be a little while out, and that's really just to give me time to practice reading Polish names and words, because oh my god, that's talk about taking a language that's designed around the Cyrillic alphabet and then using Latin letters with an absolute shit ton of diacritics. Um, Challenging. So that's and as we all know, pronunciation is not my forte. So let's see. Nixon, JFK. So I'm just reading through the comments here. Oh, this is Wintermute. This is a great question. Why do we think the West has this image of the post-war Soviet collapse, that it was peaceful when it absolutely wasn't, and that the channel is trying to work to demonstrate? Um, this is a really interesting question, and it's with a series of really complicated or simplified, depending exactly how you want to look at it, and particularly not flattering responses, especially if you're speaking on behalf of the West, whatever that looks like. Um, the image in the West that the post-Soviet space was peaceful was because it didn't really dissolve into something quite as terrible as Yugoslavia did. Don't forget the collapse, the disintegration of Yugoslavia happened in 1991, or began in 1991, just ahead of the Soviet dissolution, collapse, dismemberment, whatever phrasing you want to be able to use, and whatever sort of inference you want to be able to use for that. Um, where the western side of the Soviet Union, so that would be the Baltic republics, Belarus and Ukraine, which were they're the border with Europe, with the West. That was a relatively peaceful transition. There were incidents that happened like through the process of the collapse, but civil war and like mass destruction didn't happen in those regions. They happened, and this is where the unflattering part happens. They happened further east. They happened in the Caucasus. They happened in Central Asia. Um, and from a purely it's like that's the not important at the time, like what deemed not important, deemed less important. I mean, the choose phrasing that isn't going to get me, it's like blasted like later on or something. But in the west sides, like those regions were certainly not as important as the ones that were bordering um, with Europe and the ones that they were familiar with through history. Um, that's this is not even the Central Asia is Tatary on the, like, it's like old maps. Whereas at the time that the collapse happened, those regions, especially in places like Ukraine, there was living memory. I mean, limited, but living memory of, it's of when Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire, when, like, of the three independent Baltic states during the interwar period. So I think that honestly, that really has a lot to do with it. Is that the West's eyes tend to focus on regions that it's already familiar with, through from its own history, and it pays less attention to Latin America. It pays less attention to Asia. It pays less attention to, certainly, to Africa. Um, that's whether Yeah, like that's genuinely my answer. Um, yeah, that's and hopefully, I mean, I don't know exactly how we sort of, beyond me saying this, like, is that something that we should do a video on and sort of point that out? I mean, that may be me in my absolutely final episode, like, my signing off from the Cold War channel, is dropping a couple of big bombs like that, and I'll be much more blunt because I think a lot of you can probably read in between the lines in terms of what I'm hinting at. But yeah, like that's my answer to that question. That's it's the collapse and the dismemberment of the Soviet Union was not a peaceful process. It didn't end up like Yugoslavia, so it looked peaceful by comparison. Um, and it was, and if you lived in Georgia, if you lived in Tajikistan, if you lived in, it's like multiple other places, yeah, it really did look and feel like, like parts of Yugoslavia. So, I mean, it's perception and where you view things from is incredibly important in terms of how you interpret things. Um, so yeah, that's hopefully that answers that question, or gives some sort of an approximation of my answer, anyways. Um, let's see. Do I teach history at university? No, I do not. It's, I'm just finishing a master's degree, but beyond what I do with this Cold War business on Saturdays, I don't teach. I have a day job that is in a field completely unrelated to history and completely unrelated to anything at all that you guys would ever possibly think. So, but that's a job that pays the bills and helps me do this other job that I actually really do love. But long story short, no, I don't teach at university. I would need to go and do a PhD, of which I have absolutely zero intent. So that's but it's a the state of academia, in the English speaking world is not in a good place right now. So yeah, let's see. Who's my favorite leader of the USSR? Gorbachev would be a lot of people. I'd have to say a bit of a soft spot for Brezhnev. He seemed like a decent. Well, um, I think it's really hard to pick a favorite, depending on how you want to define favorite. If you want to define favorite as who's the most interesting leader of the Soviet Union, Khrushchev is always going to be my answer because he's an absolutely just fascinating guy. Um, in terms of how he rose and came to power, how he might have been the head of the Soviet Union, but he certainly didn't lead by consensus, which was how a Soviet leader was supposed to ignore the whole Stalin thing. Um, yeah, like Khrushchev is absolutely fascinating. Picking just saying, like, person X is my favorite makes it sort of sound like it's like, oh, like he's like, I really enjoyed what he did and like all their policies, and they were all compromised figures. I don't, which I think is very typical of a lot of global leaders. You don't typically rise to a leader a leadership position like that without having some sort of compromised issue. But being the leader of the Soviet Union, with everything that that entails, it's an authoritarian state. Yeah, that's a it's a difficult thing. Definitions are very important when I answer questions like this. Um, so my answer to your question, based on who's my favorite, as in who do I think is the most interesting, absolutely Khrushchev. Brezhnev is really interesting. Um, Brezhnev for me is really interesting because it's like these two different leaders. There's early Brezhnev from after the ouster of Khrushchev, who is, I mean, he really does come in as a sort of this dynamic, believe it or not, dynamic, like, it's like wanting to change the system, like, it's like wanting to improve things and really like, moving and trying to push the Soviet Union towards reform, believe it or not. And then sort of by the early to mid 70s, he has a drug problem, like painkillers, an addiction to painkillers, and then he starts having some serious health issues. And sort of the last almost 10 years of the Brezhnev era is where we get the gerontocracy, where it's zombie Brezhnev, where he really isn't in control of his faculties, like he's just sort of this figure that they wheel out for events, and he's stoned out of his mind a bunch of times, like for a bunch of stuff. Like it's a really sort of sad state of affairs. But I mean, I would almost look at it. Consider the Brezhnev era as like, sort of, there's two different Brezhnevs. Pick which Brezhnev era you want to look at. Early Brezhnev is a really interesting time in the Soviet Union. It's peak stability. It's like, I mean, it's through detente. All of those eras. The gerontocracy and the real sickness and the rot in the system doesn't really set in until that period. So, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting things about Brezhnev, and I'm still waiting for a really good meaty biography of Brezhnev to be published, like an academic style um, biography. That doesn't exist at the moment. So I'm still waiting on something like that. So who won the kitchen debate? That's interesting, actually. You know what? I'm not going to answer that right now. We're actually going to be doing a video on the kitchen debate relatively soon. So stay tuned, and you'll get a bit of my opinions in terms of who who was probably came out with the better advantage from the kitchen debate. So um, keeping in mind that who won something, like how somebody thinks they come out from something, is obviously like means a whole lot. Somebody can go in and score. This is going to sound weird, but somebody can go in and score more points than somebody and still lose because they think they lost. Um, so that's sort of, but we'll get into that with the kitchen debate, because that's actually a really interesting. It's obviously, this is all interesting. This is what I do. Like I love this stuff. So um, that's interesting to make a video on protectionist economic policies during the Cold War. Um, yeah, it's probably a little too close to home today. So we will take that under advisement, but I'm going to hold off on the idea of really diving into protectionist policy at the moment. Please take that answer in the spirit in which it is intended. That's that's let's see. Yeah, comment about. Sorry guys, I'm taking a long time to answer questions here, so we're way back in terms of questions. That's um, like way back. Holy jeez, I need to talk faster, don't I? Okay. Da-da-da. Somebody asking. That's transmission. Rory, hello from Ireland. The troubles. Yeah, we're going to talk about the troubles, because it's a really there's I mean, then there's two different stories to really be told, that two different angles and two different stories that we could tell with it, or at least two stories that I would like to be able to present with it. And there's the troubles from the point of view of the Irish, like the people actually like living in Ulster, living in the Northern Ireland, and experiencing the troubles. What was it about? What were they fighting for? What were they fighting against? And then the other side of that is it's a story of Imperial Britain, and a lot of Brits certainly don't. I shouldn't say a lot, but like that's a difficult topic for a lot of Brits to address, especially because by the time the Troubles are coming around, the empire really is coming to an end. But I mean, England's presence in Ireland is a result of a colonial occupation that started hundreds of years previous. So there's two different angles and two different stories to be told, and how we're going to do that. There's some details obviously that we need to work out and sort of come up with how we want to tell that story. But the Troubles is absolutely, it's fascinating, and there's that side of it, and then there's the international involvement, because the Soviets certainly were, I'm not going to say necessarily massively propping up, like, the IRA, but there was certainly like covert long way around funding and whatnot that was coming from the socialist world, as it to help to subvert English power, even at home. So um, English, I mean, like, I think this is how I think of it. There's English combat troops, like the paras and whatnot, being deployed under the streets of Northern Ireland, which is one of I mean, it's classified as one of the home countries. I can't. That would be like, it would be like, what am I trying to say here? It'd be like regular U.S. Army troops being deployed to Minnesota on a regular rotating basis in order to maintain the peace for 30 years. That's Yeah. This isn't like, it's like, this isn't National Guard. This isn't riot control. This is regular Army being rotated in to do active duty service and general service medal, like type stuff within your own country. So it's a fascinating topic. So yeah, that's to answer that question. Yeah, the Troubles is really interesting, and absolutely something that we'd like to delve into. Um, Rhodesian Bush War. Nope, we haven't done anything on Rhodesian Bush War. We will get to that, because that's part of the whole decolonization story. Funding coming from various parts of the world to support Mugabe and sort of the went on to become, Zimbabwe, from Rhodesia. Like, there's a lot of different threads that sort of weave in and out of each other, through that story. So we will get to that. I just haven't had a chance to get to that as of the moment. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just moving along. Some JS asking, have we discussed Yuri Andropov? Um, Yeah, so we haven't done anything on Andropov yet. Like, he's come up in videos on Prague Spring because he was head of the KGB at that point. He comes up in our video on the 1956 Hungarian Revolution because he was the KGB, the head of mission, in Budapest when that happened. Um, so he's I would this is the other Soviet one of three other Soviet figures that I would absolutely love to see a really good biography on. Andropov absolutely he's fascinating, because he is this KGB hardliner. Like, he is present and responsible for the crushing of at least two um, attempted revolutions, trying to remove the Soviet yoke, in Eastern Europe. Head of the KGB, obviously, like, he wields incredible power and influence. But he was he was a reformer. Andropov, through the second part of the Brezhnev, that was coming back to what I was just talking about. Andropov realizes well ahead of a lot of other people, I think, that there's rot within the Soviet economic system, and that the Soviet Union couldn't continue and couldn't survive the way that it was and the way that it was going, especially with the drift that was happening under Brezhnev. Andropov is the guy. He was the guy that sponsored Gorbachev into the Politburo. He's the one that basically promoted him. Chernenko came after, because it wasn't after Andropov. Brezhnev dies. Andropov takes over as the next logical. Gorbachev couldn't be the next guy immediately because of just the way that the inner politics worked. So Chernenko, who's practically on his deathbed anyways, he takes over. He's dead within a year, and then Gorbachev assumes the top spot. And within about a year begins sort of like rolling out the platforms of Perestroika and Glasnost. And with that, like that's the reform that Andropov had really envisioned, but he himself wasn't in a power position to be able to roll out. By the time that he became premier himself, he was he was sick. Like he knew that he was dying, and he didn't have the at that point he doesn't like it doesn't give him the time and the energy needed to be able to push through the big reforms that was being saved for Gorbachev. So Andropov is absolutely fascinating. Really would love to get. I'd love to get into some more really academic work with Andropov, preferably somebody else's, so that I don't have to learn Russian. But fascinating guy. So let's see. Yeah, this is a good question. Notice that the Cold War series has largely moved away from chronological coverage. Um, and then what sort of metrics are we using to determine what subjects we cover next? We have moved away from chronological coverage. There's still a vague. I mean, we know that we've got to progress forward through time, and like it's. I keep promising a Cuban Missile Crisis, and there's been somebody who's been very vocal in the comments of late, asking me repeatedly, like, it's like, when are we going to do the Cuban Missile Crisis? We'll get to the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm not sure. I'll be honest. Like when it comes to the Cuban Missile Crisis, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to bring anything new to the table in terms of from the Cuban Missile Crisis that hasn't been well covered already out there. I am sure that if you guys are spending time on a Saturday listening to me talk about this stuff, you guys probably know more about the Cuban Missile Crisis than I do. Um, and really big topics like that actually does tend to be the case. You guys may have noticed I like little weird esoteric topics to sort of like dig into and sort of pick away at, something that's a little bit outside on the margins. They might not do as well in terms of numbers, as my producers keep reminding me, but I find them really interesting. And as one of the people that gets to do some of the research on these things, I like picking away and researching at things that I don't already know lots and lots about, that lots of people aren't going to watch because you guys already know everything that there is to know about it. So, um, as to what metrics we're using to determine what subjects we cover, there's a small group of writers that I work with, like researchers and writers that I work with. I don't research and write all of these. I do a few a year kind of thing. They tend to be sort of some of the big chunkier ones, and then I've got some really great people that I work with, and come to we have discussions and we talk about like, okay, like, no, these are some themes and some broad ideas, like, no, that that we'd like to discuss. What do we what can we do, like what subjects fit in well with that theme, and sort of we pick and choose in terms of things like that. You guys may have noticed, like in the last couple of months, we've done a bunch of US history type themed topics, a lot of them all still Cold War related, but we're looking at the Supreme Court, the role of the Supreme Court and how that changed during the 60s. We've looked at art, like there's some art stuff, like we've done a bunch of cultural things. Lots of that's really important, not only just for the Cold War, but there's lines that you can be drawn, like there's topical things that come up in the news like these days as well. Obviously, it's like, it's like the Supreme Court, hot topic over the last couple of years. So you know what, let's take a look and see how this, like, something that's happening in the present, what that looks like in the past, because that obviously shows that there's through lines between what's happened in the past coming through to the present. Or you can look at things that are happening in the present and look backwards to see, why is this controversial now, when what did this look like 50, 60 years ago, kind of thing. So I wouldn't say that there's necessarily metrics that we're necessarily using. um, we might do better if we did, but um, that's, I mean, we do things sort of we do things by consensus, sort of what a researcher and writer might be interested in. Like, it's like we're all independent historians. Like, we all do these, like, that this is when I'm not talking to you guys, when I'm not writing a script, when I'm not presenting, et cetera, et cetera. I'm reading books about the Cold War, and as I'm reading books about the Cold War, it gives me ideas about other things that I might want to explore and talk about. So that's very much it sounds a little bit seat of my pants, which probably is a little more so than we should be, but that's really the way that we do this. So, um, and then I read the comments. What people ask for, we pay attention to. Like, that's hence we will get to the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm just not clearly I'm not as keen on getting to it or covering it as other people might think. I'm not going to bring great new insight to this. I'll be honest. Like, that's I will be upfront with you about that, guys. Like, that's just the way that this works. So, Um, let's see. What are my thoughts on George Kennan? Um, and reading the Gaddis bio. Um, I think Kennan. Well, I mean, we did a video on Kennan. This is maybe a year and a half ago, give or take. I think I think George Kennan was right. I mean, oftentimes things boil down to sort of this argument between George Kennan on one side and Paul Nitze on the other side in terms of how to view Russia or doing that, how to view the Soviet Union. So is it like, is the Soviet Union this like, is it this insular, like, security seeking country that wants to, like, that wants to maintain its own, or is it like, like the evil empire that wants to expand and take over and conquer wherever it possibly can? I personally think that George Kennan was far closer to the truth than Paul Nitze was. Um, no, I haven't read the Gaddis bio, so I can't speak to how Gaddis portrays him. I'm not a huge fan of Gaddis, by the way, but um, he's very much an American triumphalist in terms of the way that he writes history. That's just the way that he comes across to me. It's not a style of historiography that appeals to me. Um, so I because I haven't read Gaddis, I don't know exactly how he's presenting Kennan, but I personally think that Kennan was far closer to the mark than Paul Nitze was. So um, let's see. Fun fact: the RCF could have adopted a CF-14 Tomcat instead of the CF-18 Hornet. The Tomcat was designed for a very specific use, which was long-range fleet defense. Um, by the time that the RCF was sourcing replacements for the CF-104, yeah, the CF-14 would have been great as a long, like, basically as a fleet defender, long range, high altitude, like, it's like fast interceptor, which is absolutely what a CF-14. Look what I'm doing. What the F-14 Tomcat was designed to do. But that really wasn't what the RCF needed. The RCF needed a multi-purpose. They needed something that could both, it's like both dogfight, missile truck, and carry weapons. Yes, the F-14 could do that, but that's really not what it's like absolutely designed to do, despite what Top Gun will tell you. Um, yeah, like, I mean, that the CF-18, it's an interesting count. Like, it's I'm picturing, like, it's like I'm picturing this, the Canadian version of like Top Gun. Hey, I'm that's what I've got going through my head. It's like, it's not Maverick, it's some guy named Gord. But um, anyways, that's interesting. I actually hadn't heard that was one of the possibilities, but I don't think that the F-14 would have been necessarily fit for purpose in terms of what the RCF needed in a fighter at that time. Not that the F-104, the CF-104, was particularly fit for purpose either, but we managed to make it work when they stayed in the air. Let's see. Oh, a Germany question. Notice that there's almost no content on Brandt's Ostpolitik. Um, yeah, we actually haven't gotten to Ostpolitik yet. That really doesn't kick off until into the 60s, which is really, if we were sticking to our chronological, where that's sort of where we're stalled about now, is somewhere in the 1960s period. I keep going back to the 50s and back to the 50s, and sometimes back to the 40s. Um, I keep doing that, and I keep taking the channel sort of off topic and refusing to push us forward. Ostpolitik, we will be addressing it because it is obviously ridiculously important in terms of reconciliation in Europe, and then sort of how things move forward in terms of the relationship between the Germanys and the relationship between East and West generally, leading up to the 80s, obviously, and then the process of the collapse of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the process of reunification. But Brandt's Ostpolitik absolutely plays very heavily into that. So um, that's somebody wants. I have. Is this coverage of a basketball game? Like, this is brand new to me. I don't know anything about this. I'm my sport interest is limited to one sport. That's what I've decided to give my time and energy to, and that's football, or what North Americans would refer to as soccer. I follow Premier League as much as I can, and that's pretty much about the extent of my sports following. So um, send us send us an email about that. Give me a little bit of background if you can, and I'm curious to know. I don't disagree. Nobody does drama better than the Greeks. I can't disagree with that. But yeah, shoot us some more information about that. I'd be curious to see what It's like what's the angle, what's the spin. So, um, what do I think of Syria's new regime? I'm tentatively hopeful. I mean, Assad to refer to uh, to refer to Assad as a bad person is absolutely selling things short. I don't think actually, as I'm reading this, I don't think this question was actually intended for me, but I'm going to answer it anyways. I'm tentatively hopeful for things in Syria, but I think it's early days and you never know what happens going forward. I mean, this is early days. Tentatively hopeful. We'll see. Um, Question about me teaching at the university. No, I think I've answered that one. Um, do I think the GDR would have been more prosperous, stable if they hadn't had to pay such the drastic reparations to the USSR? Probably. I mean, it's the 53 uprising in East Germany was fueled by the repayment plans and the repayment schedules and the austerity that was necessary to impose to maintain the repayment plans. Give me 1 second here, guys. There we go. Um, but yeah, that's could have been more prosperous and more stable. The East Germany was quite stable up until quite late in the 80s. It was very stable. It was maintained by an autocratic government that was backed by a superpower, but it was quite stable. Could it have been more prosperous? Possibly. Counterfactual history is not a thing that I particularly tend to entertain for a wide variety of reasons. Um, but yeah, there's absolutely no. I mean, I can certainly say there's absolutely no doubt that the reparations imposed by the Soviets played a huge role in terms of holding back possible development of East Germany, whether that was in financial terms, whether that was in um, production terms because of so much factory machinery being shipped to the Soviet Union as part of the reparations plan, or even in manpower and labor based on the number of German POWs that were held in the Soviet Union as to work as slave labor effectively past the 1948 um, return date to I think it was as late as 1955, I want to say, before the absolute last of the German POWs were officially returned. So yeah, I mean that's my answer to that. So um, do I think was the USSR outspent by the West and that's why it collapsed? No, no, that's not why it collapsed. I mean, that's certainly a theory that's and whatnot that gets floated around a fair bit. The outspending portion of it, all that hurt was efficiency. Like that cut into that is in a guns versus butter situation. The Soviet Union chose to spend the money on guns because it felt that it needed to maintain some sort of competition with the West, and it diverted things away from the butter. But it wasn't the lack of butter that brought down the Soviet Union. It was nationalism that brought down this, like in straight point of fact. It was nationalism and regionalism that brought down the Soviet Union. It had really didn't have to do with the spend factor. There was an efficiency issue, absolutely, and it's certainly like that spending held back what could have been diverted into improving the lives of people. But I don't think that that's the reason why the Soviet Union collapsed. So, um, how, how stupid is the imperial measurement system? In case you guys don't know, I'm Canadian. What that means is that I tell time in standard time. I do temperature measurements in Celsius. I measure distance in metric or time, like it's how far away do you live? 30 minutes away. Um, I measure my height and my weight in imperial. Um, Canada has this really weird mixed hybrid thing um, that we do, where everything officially is supposed to be metric, but lots and lots of stuff unofficially gets done in still does gets done in imperial. It's absolutely the spillover influence from our good best friends to the south. But if you want to make fun of metric systems and like measurement systems, I mean, let's talk about the UK, who measure things in stone. Don't ask me, I have no idea. Um, do I think metric is easier? Yeah, there's a logic to it. It's base 10, like it's super easy. Like there's not some weird mnemonic devices that you need to remember to try to, remember how many feet are in a football field or whatever the hell it happens to be. But I'm not going to necessarily mock them entirely too much, because I mean I live in a system where we've bastardized both of them. So that's yeah. Um, Let's see. I'm way behind on questions here, so I might skip a few of them here, and I apologize if I skipped over yours. It is absolutely nothing personal. It's more just what I feel like talking about. So, um, let's see. More content on politics and its influence on art and architecture. Yeah, we'll do a few more. We've got a couple of interesting ones like directly in the works right now, that touch on this type of thing. Um, one of our researcher writers is really interested in this stuff. It's something that they focus on in their own personal work quite heavily. Um, and she and I have gone back and forth about a bunch of different things. We've come up with some what I think are going to be some really interesting topics that talk very much explore a lot of that art and culture and the relationship back to politics and politics back to art and culture. So yeah, stay tuned. Um, let's see. Sorry guys, give me 1 second, or however long it takes me to read through here. Um, Red Army faction, Bader Meinhof gang. Yeah, we'll be touching on we're going to be touching on sort of these domestic. I mean, it's domestic for Germany. It's domestic revolutionary groups um, that that operated in West Germany. There's actually a few cells of various different factions that similar minded that operate in the U.S. and we're going to be doing some work on those as well. So some of the left-leaning terror groups that were operating in the West. RAF and Baader Meinhof gang. There's Red Brigades that happened in Italy. Like you get groups like the Weather Underground in the U.S. There's some really interesting sort of topics to explore with that. We are absolutely going to be looking at those. So, um, question: do we have any videos about an organization like ASEAN? We don't on ASEAN. We've got a couple like on CIEDO and CENTO, some of the early defense, collective defense agreements that were arrived at in the 1950s. But nothing that we haven't done anything on ASEAN quite as of yet. We'll likely be moving into something like that as sort of like the evolution of collective security through different regions. So, um, um, skipping forward through a couple of questions here. I honestly didn't think that I'd get this many questions from you guys. Like I appreciate the engagement. This is really like fantastic. Thank you. Um, I will uh, I will halt on questions at the moment just to remind people that what we do here is not we do really love doing this. This is still a for-profit organization. Not that there's much profit in this, and a lot of times, but we have costs that we need to cover. So any sort of it's 2025 may not be the best time to be hitting people up for money, but if you like the work that we do and you want to be able to see us be able to keep doing the work that we do, please do consider becoming a Patreon. That really is the best way that you can help support us. One-time donations are always welcome. YouTube membership, absolutely. The links are always in the show notes for all of these. But yeah, like consider becoming a financial supporter if you can. It would be very much appreciated. And if you can't, the next best thing that you can do absolutely is harass your friends, your enemies, tell people about Cold War channels, share videos, share links to things, like bombard people, like let other people know that even if you hate them, let them know that we're here. So that's yeah, that's my commercial interruption. Thank you very much for listening to me, and now back to the questions. Um, More light needs to be shone on the GDR's foreign policy in Africa. Yeah, GDR foreign policy in general is actually fascinating to look at. There's lots of stuff there that I've been discovering recently, in terms of different relationships. East Germany's relationships to various countries in the developing world, whether that's in Africa, whether that's in, I was going to say Latin America, but that's basically Cuba, or even like in Asia with the relationship with with Vietnam. There's some really interesting independent foreign policy decisions and some independent foreign policy avenues that the GDR takes on and really explores from a genuinely ideological framework. Like they want to be the helping, the old, like literally the older brother that's helping, like like the younger sibling step up and come into their own. It turns into there's some really interesting type relationships that get built, including the quest for coffee. East Germany starts in Ethiopia looking to grow coffee once it realizes that it can't meet the coffee needs in East Germany of the German population from buying coffee on the open market. Believe it or not, East Germany not famous for its mountain grown coffee, and looking for um, these new sources, and seeing what they could do in terms of being able to support and build up socialist brotherhood globally in the process of developing new markets. And they eventually turned to Vietnam, and of course the first coffee harvests that start coming out of Vietnam after the setup and the establishment of these coffee plantations in the early 80s. Doesn't happen because coffee takes so long to grow. It doesn't actually happen until after East Germany's already reunified. So, um, yeah, what do you do? But yes, that's there's some really interesting threads and some interesting subjects that we should really do need to explore there. So, um, yeah, the eager to portray the fall of communism as the triumph of democracy. I mean that's Francis Fukuyama's end of history right there. Which I mean, if you've read Fukuyama, I mean that's if you read it in the light of where he's writing from and what he's talking about, yeah, like that's I mean that it's very much speaks to that. The end of history makes it sound so easily mockable, and we've certainly been amongst the many hundreds of thousands of people who have mocked Francis Fukuyama. Um, bad title. Very interesting to read it as a period piece. We will be absolutely getting to Fukuyama. I'm actually really excited. Can't believe I'm saying that, but I'm actually really excited to dive into to Fukuyama. So um, let's see. There we go. That's the prerequisite question. When we will do a video on the Cuban Missile Crisis. When we get there. Um, there we go. As a historian, what year is my favorite? I, as a historian, I think in terms of chronology as opposed to dates, if that makes sense. Like an actual date on its own, a simple date on its own doesn't make sense. It's like it's irrelevant. I mean, 1988, if something happens in 1988 or 1989, it's irrelevant unless you put it next to what's happening around it. What came first, what came next, what came last. Like that's the important part. I think I've talked about this on a live stream, maybe like even like a year ago. I can never, for the life of me, remember what year the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. I always have to stop and think about it. Was it 61, 62, or 63? Then I have to sort of stop and frame it as, okay, no, Kennedy was killed in 63, so Bay of Pigs had to have been the year before. And it's like I have to sort of work my way backwards through this. Because it's irrelevant. The chronology is what's really important. Is what came first, what came second, what came next. Um, in terms of what I think is a year where lots of really interesting, relevant things happened relative to each other, I don't know. Like every time I pick up a new book, like there's something that's like, oh, this must have been the most interesting year that's ever been. And then I pick up another book and it's got a bunch of stuff from something 10 years later. It's like, no, wait, no, this has got to be the next thing. That could be a function of the ADHD that I'm pretty damn sure that I say that I have wired around in my brain. But that's absolutely like how I tend to look at things. I think there's some like there's big standout dates where like that like tons of like really ridiculous things like all happened like relative to each other. 1989, 1991, 1983. 63, 56 is a really big one. 53 is a really big one. 1950 is absolutely huge. 1945, believe it or not, a couple of little things happened in 1945. Lots of different things, but it's all relevant. It's all relative to each other. So that's how I tend to look at things. And you can ask 100 different historians that same question, and some will tell you something similar, and lots of people are going to tell you something completely different. So, um, yeah, let's see. Just skipping along here. Um, sorry, guys, give me a second. Let's. Um, well, thank you for this question. Less biased and better informed channels discussing Cold War history. Go find one. I'm not. No one's keeping you here. That's all that I'll say to that. Is no one makes you watch this. I appreciate you coming in, leaving a comment. Appreciate it as always. Okay, that's there's always something that somebody else is going to do that might speak to somebody better. Thanks for coming by. Appreciate it. That's let's see. Just moving along here. I'm way back on questions here, I think. So oh yeah, I'm way off here. Let's see. I'm just going to scroll back a bit and jump in because um, a conspiracy about Gagarin not being the first person in space, or is that BS? Yes, there is a conspiracy theory about that. And I apologize, Gary, if I'm not able to remember the exact details of what that conspiracy is, but there is absolutely an argument that is made, and it does tend to revolve through conspiracy circles. But there's an argument that's out there that's being made that Gagarin wasn't the first person in space, that it was somebody else. But anytime, I mean, conspiracy is everywhere. Believe it or not, yeah, but that is there is something out there. I'm not a conspiracy guy. Like it's not something that really like that I do. That's a thread of like a brand of history, conspiracy historians. And there's lots of interesting things that run through those kinds of things. It's lots of cultural underlay and whatnot, but that absolutely is a conspiracy that floats around out there. So um, let's see. My thoughts on the new Civ 7 release. You feel like I play it? Yeah, I've played every iteration of Civilization since it first launched in 1991. I was there for Nuclear Gandhi right at the beginning. I am a Civ player when I do play Civ. Um, I don't play video games particularly that much. I love video games. Finding time to play them is always a challenge. Civ 7 drops quite soon. I will play it at some point. Um, for anybody who wants to know which my favorite iteration was, Civ 3 is the one that I Civ 1 is the one that I have the most hours in, just because it's the oldest, and I played like the living crap out of that game when I first bought it in 1991. Civ 3 is actually my next most played, and I love Civ 3. I just have such fond memories of spending hours and hours and hours playing that particular iteration of it. I know Civ 6 is divisive with a lot of players. I like Civ 6. I like all the iterations. Different. They're all different from each other. To sit and like shit on one because it doesn't do this or it does like I hate this, that's fine. Like that's a like your own personal thing. But to call the entire game crap because you yourself don't like that one thing, it's a personal opinion. I get that. To shit on everybody else for liking something because you don't, well, that's not particularly fair. Just don't play that version. You've got five others, soon to be six others that you can choose from. I have not really paid attention to exactly what Civ 7 is going to look like. I know they're doing this like multi civil. You pick one at the beginning and you evolve into two extra like two new civilizations from that. I don't know how that's going to look, but you know what? I'm gonna play it. I know I'm gonna play it. I'll probably like once I figure it out, and I'll probably enjoy it because that's the kind of guy that I am. I like the Civ games, so that's yeah, that's oh, this is a good one. My history prof said history isn't history until everyone involved is dead. Do I agree? I don't. I don't think that somebody needs to be dead for it to be history. I think that there needs to be sufficient time having passed that there's a decent amount of documentation, like official documentation, has been released and is publicly available, whether that's declassified files, whatever that happens to be, and or there's been enough time to be able to sit back and look and gauge what kind of impact and influence something like a decision that happened at point X has actually happened. Like what impact has that had? Typically that's 20, 25 to 30 years, like that 25 to 30 years. I think is really when you start looking at things as being considered historical, and that's really the early edge. And anyone who's writing is sort of at that early edge, and this includes current historians who are writing about the fall of the Soviet Union. A lot of that is going to be subject to revisionary work over the next 10, 15, 20, 50, 100, 200 years. Like literally as more documentation, more archives, more everything gets released and it becomes available and becomes we're able to study that in further detail. We get a much clearer picture with the passage of more time. Everybody involved having to be dead, I don't think that's a prerequisite in the slightest. I mean, I think World War II is certainly history. Not everybody from World War II is dead yet. Doesn't make it any less historical. The Cuban Missile Crisis, there's lots of people from the Cuban Missile Crisis that are still alive, but it's absolutely a piece of history. So that's very much a how I look at things. Like something becomes historical once sufficient time has passed to be able to allow a much more neutral look and a much more clear look to see what kind of impact that event has happened. Revisionism, to speak to revisionism, because lots of people get really upset when people rewrite history. Revisionism is part of the historical process. It's going through and realizing that there's more sources, there's more information that's coming from lots of different places, that and incorporating that and those viewpoints and all those different things into updated histories is part of the historical process. That's what makes good history. Otherwise, if it worked anything different, there would be one history book on a subject and that's it. No other history books would ever be written on any subject. And if you've ever been to a bookstore, we know that's not the case. So, by the way, go to a bookstore, go support your local bookstores. I get that Amazon and the big box players and that like get you fantastic prices, but for a few extra dollars, supporting a local bookstore, that they're anchors of communities. Um, support print media, like it's really important. That's something that I'm passionate about. Anyways, that's different soapbox. Um, that's let's see. Bum, bum. Speaking of books, do I have any book recommendations on East Germany? Off the You're kind of putting me on the spot here, and it's been a little while since I've actually done any look at East Germany. The one that springs to the top of mind at the moment is Katja Hoyer's Behind the Wall. That was 2 years ago. I want to say a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it's not exactly an academic look at it. Katja was she was a she was East German by birth. Um, Grew up in the West, but I mean she was born just before the wall ended, like a few years before the wall came down. Um, and she basically it's not exactly a memoir, but it's a much more personalistic look at um, events in life in East Germany. It's gotten lots of praise. It's gotten some criticism, some of it fair, but it's not an academic work, and a lot of the criticism that it's received is based around that idea. Um, but Beyond the Wall by Katja Hoyer is a really good, compelling, and it's very well written, which makes it a very compelling read. I read a lot of academic work, and a lot of academic work is incredibly dull and incredibly boring. Not in terms of because of its content, but because of the style that academia seems to demand. Um, so finding somebody who does good, compelling research and is able to present it well, that's a really nice combination of things that doesn't happen as often as we all sort of wish that it would. So yeah, so that would be my recommendation there. Katja Hoyer's Beyond the Wall. Um, let's see, is I'm sort of around the questions people talk about when I was talking about the Troubles, which I feel was actually a really long time ago at this point. Um, yeah, that's let's see. I'm gonna sort of scroll forward a little bit here, um, or scroll forward a lot, as the case may be. Let's see. Bum, bum, bum. Oh, there we go. Fleet ballistic subs. Um, yeah, Amy, I would like to do something on submarines. I had started something on. It wasn't the Scorpion. It was I can't, the first boat that was supposed to be the lead in the skipjack class that went down under when it was still in test trials. I can't think of it. Thresher, USS Thresher. I started a piece looking at USS Thresher, which I know is an attack boat as opposed to a fleet boat, like a ballistic a boomer. Um, I will have to move into SSBNs at some point, simply because we need to do that as a continuation of our nuclear sort of the explanation of how nuclear warfare was supposed to work. It started this with the deterrence theory episode, which was at this point I think is still probably one of the best single things that I've ever written. And not enough damn people have watched that. If you're going to go and share like a video, that's the one that I want you guys to share, because I love that video. Even if it is about theory, it's a horrible word to hear sometimes. But the evolution of SSBNs and the move into a secure deterrent buried deep underwater is absolutely key. So yeah, it's like we really do need to do an exploration of how fleet boats worked. But I'm not sure exactly how we're going to get to that. Whether it anytime I sit down to start writing something like that, it definitely turns into this real nuts and bolts kind of discussion. And it's like this isn't a nuts and bolts like armaments kind of channel. This is much more about sort of like we try to present a broader, higher political-ish perspective. But that is absolutely something that we do need to talk about. So um, yeah, that's Medici versus Borgia. Anything before 1789 is ancient history to me, guys. Like I apologize, and really even anything before the Crimean War is still kind of pushing it. Um, so forgive me if I decline from answering a Renaissance Italy question, but yeah, I have no idea. The fact that I can even say Medici, I think even half close to proper, deserves everybody contributing at least $1. So um, that's yeah. A Canadian who doesn't follow hockey, grounds for deportation. Believe me, the way things are going in 2025, there's plenty of other grounds for me to be deported. So, lack of hockey is going to be the least of that. So, that's a joke, by the way. I'm yeah, I've been talking for an hour and 40 minutes. You guys are like gluttons for punishment. It must be really, really damn cold out there if everybody's hanging around here listening to me. So that's thank you for that. That means an awful lot to hear. That somebody who's watched every single video, that is hours and hours of punishment. You deserve a medal for that. So well done. That's a hero of the yeah, Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, but it's a hero of the Cold War. Gold star that you get to wear in your lapel. That's yeah. Moving forward. Um, let's see. A couple of a couple of people have made some donations, and I would very much would like to say like that's David K has made a generous donation. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. 10 minutes has also made a financial donation. Again, thank you. That really does mean an awful lot. Um, I know I'm only half joking when I say that it's like financial support is really important. Um, but it does mean a lot when people are willing and able to give up even like a few dollars of very hard-earned money. So thank you. Really do appreciate that. Let's see. That's um, Joseph, apparently because of us, managed to pass a 20th century history class with a B grade. If you'd gone and watched some other channels, maybe you would have gotten an A because apparently we're terrible, according to some other comments in here. But that's, yeah, that's just me being bitter at this point. So, what's my favorite time in history? Onion heads. It's the Cold War. It has to be the Cold War. That's why I do this. This isn't this this is a time period that I really do love and I find fascinating. I started sort of my interest in history. I was probably like 10 or 11 kind of thing, and found some like pretty old, dusty, musty books at the local library covering the Second World War, and I've read an awful lot about the Second World War, and I've always found that super interesting. That is definitely a very interesting time period. But my discovery of the Cold War, which comes around from some like video games released in the 80s and the 90s, um, like flight sims and things like that. Um, that really sparks an interest in the Cold War and the marriage of like sort of the marriage of the Second World War to the Cold War, that transition period from 45 and onwards. That to me is that's my absolute favorite. I love that bleed over from from the late Second World War period and how that sort of impacts and sets everything up for the 45 years that sort of experiences afterwards. That is absolutely my favorite my favorite time period, um, which hopefully that comes across in everything that we do, and you can probably see it on my face and how animated I am when I answer questions like this. So, um, yeah, Very little commentary about China in this act. I mean, if you, okay, if you're accusing this of being an act, well, that's, I mean, I don't know what you would prefer instead. Um, or maybe I'm just misinterpreting that, in which case I apologize. Um, China, for much of the Cold War, was certainly a communist authoritarian planned government state. It wasn't until like the 70s and especially into the 80s that the sort of free market reforms started to begin to be introduced. And the rise of China that begins following like Nixon going to China, but doesn't really come into fruition until probably the early 2000s. The 90s was very much a time of partnership between the West and China, with the factories, sort of the sweatshops of the West being 100% located in China through that period. Um, if people want to talk to me about China, you can ask me about China. That's totally fine. I mean, I'm not um, stopping that. Um, we've done a video, Onion Head, we've done a video on Operation Paperclip. That's one of the earlier ones, so it probably isn't, it probably doesn't have the same style in terms of presentation and whatnot that any of our later, like newer videos would have. But we have done a video on Paperclip. So um, yeah, that's, let's see. Um, Sorry, just scrolling forward through here. Um, Episodes on defectors, Mark. No, you know what? We haven't. We've done very little on espionage history. We've sort of done some, it's like explained who the major sort of KGB, like it's CIA, MS MSS, the Chinese Security Service. And then, it's like we've gotten in and done mention of like, sort of the secret services in a few of the Soviet republics, and the satellite states in terms of how they were used to suppress and maintain order and control. But we haven't really done too much about certainly on defectors. Um, yeah, that's. I mean, it's an interesting topic. Intelligence history, espionage history. That's its own subset of Cold War history that has its own really deep historiography to it, um, which as a new subject that actually becomes very daunting as a researcher to try to bite into that and to present and to speak to that knowledgeably, without having done hundreds of hours of research and reading on that prior to it. It's not something that we necessarily want to shy away from, but we just have to be. We might have to find someone who's able and willing and happy to work with us, who's got a bit of a background on that, just to be able to address those subjects. Um, Appropriately and respectfully and with confidence. So um, yeah, let's see. Bum, bum. Sorry, I'm moving through this here because I am going to have to draw this up probably within the next 10 minutes or so. Like my wife is probably wondering where the hell I've got to. Um, yeah, that's let's see. Um, Any opinions and thoughts on the U.S. right wing's neoliberal fast? Blah, blah, blah. Do I have thoughts? Yes, I have many. That's a great question. Moving along. Um, I'll be honest. Anybody who doesn't, yeah, that's everybody has thoughts on this. Some people are more in favor of it than others. Yep. What can I say? Um, let's see. I will. What I Sorry, I'm trying choosing my words carefully here. What I will say to that is that it's very interesting to look at statements, to look at phrasing of things, to look at like the historical ideas that are drawn on in the present to look at what the antecedents are. Like, see, okay, what are they referring to when a U.S. rep when a member of the U.S. House of Representatives calls something a communist plot to do something? What's why is that? This is what I find really fascinating. Beyond the absolute ridiculousness of the phrasing, why is that phrasing being used? Like, what's the like why is that language being chosen specifically? Is it because they genuinely think that that's communism? Why do they, if so, then why do they think that that particular thing is communism? Why is communism such a bugbear? Why is that such a like a why is that such a taboo thing to be called? It's are we repeating ourselves? Is this the early 1950s? Like, is this the early 50s? Like, with McCarthyism, there's lots of these parallels and lots of these things that sort of run back. Anytime that you read a statement, and this can be from the left, from the right, from the center, from really from anything. Stop and stop and look at the language and the phrasing and the referencing that's being used. Really interesting to see how historical callbacks get used in the present day. How accurate are they? How inaccurate are they? That's this big part of the reason I study history is so that I can sit and I can look at these things. And lots of people will say that, it's like that history repeats itself. History absolutely does not repeat itself. There's no historical determinism. Like, just because something happened in the past doesn't mean it's going to happen again in the future. But we definitely do see things very similar happening. Do we learn from our mistakes? As much as I would love to say that we do, we absolutely don't. Mark Twain, I think, said it best that history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. Um, and I think we're in a very heavy rhyming scheme at the moment. My English teacher in high school would be very, very impressed that I remember that. But yeah, that's what I will say to that. Um, I will try to be a little bit. If you're going to sit and do analysis on it, like, try to have some fun with it and do some academic analysis of it, and like that's the breakdown, and see what it is, Linda, that you can pick out from that. Anybody? Yeah. Couple more here. Let's see. Sorry, guys. There's people making comments about the Romans from a little while back. I'm really not sure why. No vigorous Roman salutes in here, please. It's not what we do here. That's Operation Operation Urgent Fury. Was Urgent Fury Grenada? I want to say it is. Sildrift, somebody confirm if I'm right or wrong there, but I think Urgent Fury, I think, was Grenada. Are we going to cover that? Yeah, absolutely. Grenada is this really weird sort of like on its own. It's this really weird sort of like, it's like, oh my God, like the US just invaded, like, it's like another island in the Caribbean. There's a case of history repeating itself. When you look at it, Urgent Fury in Grenada in 83 as part of this broader picture of other things that are happening in 1983, actually really, really important because it set the Soviets like absolutely over the edge. Like, 83 was the KL shoot down of the Soviet Union. Urgent Fury. There was the Beirut, the Marine barracks bombing. There was the U.S. Navy running like active like live fire exercises in the Sea of Okhotsk, which was technically international, like which is international waters, and they were allowed to, but it's really basically a Soviet sea. Um, Anyways, like there's all these other things, like, and then that ends up with Reforger in the fall of '83 and Able Archer, which is possibly the closest to one of the single closest incidents to uh, nuclear a nuclear exchange, maybe possibly even one-sided. Um, and it doesn't really get the attention because the other side didn't really know that the other side was actually preparing to go to war. Anyways, it's really interesting that when you put Urgent Fury into a broader perspective and broader picture. So, we see any more videos about the Greek Civil War. Um, I'd like to say yes, but I'll be honest, probably not. There's too many acronyms for my head to keep track of. Um, it's a flippant answer. The Greek Civil War is really important, and it's obviously it's a key setup and a key moment in European early Cold War history. Um, I'm not sure that we're going to come back to it at this point. We may come back and do a revision on it. I'm not sure. We may do more. If we do, it's probably going to be a re like a tweaking of the existing video that we have in the Greek Civil War, rather than delving deeper into specific topics. That's probably um, the best that I could sort of I could give to that. Um, Sean, yes. Thank you. I was the voice for the Kings and Earls podcast on the Mongols. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed my voice. Apparently, I have a voice and a face for radio, as they say, or podcasts in this day and age. I've never really done voice work before. Like, this is really all that I've done. I stepped back from the podcasting because I had some time commitment issues. Um, yeah, that's basically my time commitment issues. I was going back to school to do my master's, and having to do all of those different things. Just it was way too much. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've thought of doing, like, launching maybe my own small, like, side channel on YouTube, of maybe doing my own podcast, but really the last thing that the world needs is another middle-aged white guy with a podcast. So I really don't know. Like, that's the door is kind of open there. In the meantime, I'm now that I'm finished with school, I'm very quite happy to be able to choose to read whatever the hell it is that I want to read. So that's been kind of nice. Um, let's see. That's gonna be wrapping up here in the next couple of minutes here. I'm just gonna I'll say thank you again, everybody. Really appreciate everybody's tuning in and taking time on a Saturday afternoon. I know it's, or evening or morning or wherever it may happen. Sunday morning, probably it's for maybe one of you who's really super hardcore or an insomniac or God knows. Um, Jeremy Richardson, speaking of, like, coming in from down under, which I assume is Australia as opposed to, like, Chile or something. But um, that's so we did one episode that was Australia focused. That was the Petrov affair, which was, for me, was absolutely fascinating. I learned an awful lot about Australian Cold War history just from that. That was super fascinating, super interesting. I'd like to come back to Australia and do a bit more work on. I've got all of the primary document stuff from the Maralinga tests. So that was the British testing, nuclear bomb testing at Maralinga. And I'd like to do something on that, whether that's exclusively focused on Australia or sort of a lead into to South Pacific testing in general. I'm not exactly sure, but beyond what's his name, Howard Holt, and his ability to swim and then not swim any further, and then have swimming pools named after him. Um, Australia's kind of a I don't know a ton about, like, super in depth about Australian history, but it is something I think that is probably a more deserving look at, that we should address. So, but thank you for. I'm not sure if staying awake or just being up this early. Appreciate it, Jeremy. It's glad to have you along. Um, let's see. Just wrapping up here. Again, Knight Spearhead financial contribution. Thank you very much. Really super, super appreciate that. It's absolutely fantastic. Thank you. I was only partly kidding, as I said. I was only partly kidding about the it's apparently all I have to do is hold my hat out and ask for money, and a few people will drop a few coins in. But thank you, guys. It really does. It really does mean a lot. Um, let's see. Almost done here. Yeah, Urgent Fury. Sorry, guys. Um, Almost done. Yeah. So this is 1983 was as close to World War III, more than 62 and 79. No, I disagree with that statement. I'm not going to shoot it down because there's still a lot that's unknown about Able Archer. 83 is probably one of those moments that we were super close. Um, but as I said, like the U.S. and the West weren't hyper aware of how on edge the Soviet Union actually was, in terms of their reaction to all the actions that first Reagan administration had been conducting, um, with a very paranoid Brezhnev. Um, yeah, 62 is the Cuban Missile Crisis. It all comes back around. 62 is probably still the absolute closest that we ever came, to a full scale nuclear exchange. Um, yeah, that's because I mean both sides were absolutely aware of what was going on. It was very possible. It's sort of this idea that, like, it's like how close to a nuclear exchange are you if one side doesn't know that a nuclear exchange is about to happen? When both sides are absolutely conscious of it. 61 is one of those other dates, with the Berlin crisis, where both sides were absolutely toe to toe, like literally toe to toe, at a white line through the city of Berlin, with tanks pointing at each other and moving the DEFCON charts. Um, so yeah, it's like I mean, 83 was absolutely was a hold your breath moment. Um, but it's the number of people in the West who actually knew that that was a hold your breath moment, pretty slim. The number of people in the East who knew that was a hold your breath moment, slightly more probably, but still not that many. Um, so yeah, that's it's up for debate. I mean, it's an interpretation. Were we closer in 83 than we were in 62? Will we ever know that? I mean, probably not. I don't think that there's a I don't think there's a single document that could be created or that was created that says, like, it's like yes, like we were closer by zero point 0.5 on whatever scale you've chosen. But it makes for some really interesting discussions. Absolutely. Um, okay, almost done here. Sorry guys. As I said, I've been talking for 2 hours and I've only had like a couple of little sips of my tea, so my throat is actually starting to feel kind of raw. Um, that's So in exchange for that, you get to listen to me drinking. So that's there you go for the ASMR freaks out there. That's you're welcome. That's yeah. You know what? Yeah, it's 4 o'clock. It's 2 hours. I am going to sign off here. I would like to say thank you very much, to everybody. We are on an off week this year, as you may have noted. This year, an off week this week, with new videos. Um, it's just the way that the production schedule works. We'll be back next week, with more, and then lots more after that. We've got a bunch of stuff in the that's in the can and in production, waiting to go out for you guys. But in the meantime, thank you guys very much. All your contributions and all your support today is very much appreciated. It really does help keep us going. As I said, please share with other people that you might think are interested. If you're in school, honestly, like tell your profs, tell your teachers, like, it's like you wouldn't believe how many like profs really dig on this kind of stuff. Um, they probably won't think you're a nerd, or they won't think you're a nerd any more than you probably already are. That's a compliment. Um, yeah, that's all I got for right now, guys. It's been I appreciate all the great questions, and history is shades of gray and rarely black and white. So thanks a lot, guys. Have a great day.